But welcome back to Arguing Semantics. Today I will be doing a review of West Side Story, the new musical. West Side Story 2021 is the latest revival of the West Side Story musical from the 1950s. Adapting the tale of Romeo and Juliet into a more modern context, West Side Story tells the tale of Tony and Maria, two young people living in New York, caught in the middle of a conflict between two rival gangs, the White Jets and the Puerto Rican Sharks. Set to the music and lyrics of Stephen Sondheim, West Side Story is a tale of love, hate, and the things that divide us and bring us together. So here's the first thing to get out of the way. First of all, I call it a revival, not a remake, because it feels more like a traditional Broadway revival, in the sense of we're just remounting a show that has been done and trying to put a few twists on it or update it in various ways. And that's what this is. That's really all it is. That being said, it does that very, very well. It can be a little bit tough to talk about this, but in many ways, this is better than the original. It's not going to replace it by any stretch. If what you were looking for was West Side Story with much better cinematography, a modified social commentary that gives a little bit more justifications to some of the characters, combined with a more ethnically diverse cast than the original, basically no Latino facing, this is very, very good. I am surprised so few people have actually seen this movie so far. I mean, first and foremost, it's being directed by Steven Spielberg, who almost always hits, at least mostly. Some of his movies are better than others, but this is definitely him showing off a little. It's also nice to see him finally do a musical. Cinematically, it is incredibly well done. They chose some amazing locations to shoot at. The focus also always seems to be in the right place. They really did a great job of showing off the choreography, showing off the talents of this young, talented cast, and doing it all with a great retro style that feels like it can fit in today as well as fit into the same era as when the original was filmed. It's also anchored by some amazing performances. Granted, the performances aren't all as great as they could have been, not unlike the original, but the ones that are good are really good. For instance, we've definitely got a star-making turn from Rachel Zegler, who plays Maria, who has also recently been cast in the Snow White remake, which should be great. She is fantastic in this. And David Alvarez, who plays her brother Bernardo, also just totally kills it in this role. With the more classical dance style, still brings a force and bravado to his character that is just absolutely needed and really brings part to his character, especially in the more dramatic and dark moments that come later in the film. But most of all, the standout in this film is Mike, I think it's pronounced Faist, I could be wrong, it's F-A-I-S-T, who plays Riff. Seriously, one of the best performances of the year. If he does not get nominated for an Oscar, I will be incredibly surprised. They messed with the script just a little bit to give his character some more motivation, and he takes that and imbues Riff, who is Tony's best friend and the leader of the Jets gang, and who is traditionally just played as, you know, a rough and tumble rapscallion who's just kind of bad for bad's sake in a lot of cases, and really brings more motivation and humanity to this character than I have seen in most musicals, much less in many movies that I've seen recently. It is genuinely one of the best performances of the year, and it's worth it just for his performance. That being said, there are a couple of weak links in the cast. Now granted, when I say weak link, I just mean they're not as good as they could be, but they're still pretty great. Ariana DeBose, who plays Anita, is definitely one of the weaker ones. She definitely feels like there's a joke amongst a lot of theater actors that there are three aspects of being a theater actor. It's singing, dancing, and acting. And for the most part, most people are 2 out of 3. For instance, I move well, personally. And she really feels like she is a dancer and a singer over an actor. There are a couple of big scenes where she needed to bring a little bit more than she did, and it kind of takes away from the scene because she comes off as a little bit wooden. But that saying, she's clearly having a lot of fun. Her singing and dancing is genuinely great, and doesn't take away that much. The other big weak link, and it's kind of disappointing because it's one of the leads, is Ansel Elgort as Tony. And it's not because he's bad by any stretch. Once again, he's totally good in the role. He's just not as good as some of the other ones, and he really gets overshadowed, especially because he's got so many scenes with Riff. He really gets overshadowed by him in almost every scene. That being said, he's still good. The problem is that he's clearly not a singer in the traditional sense for a couple of different reasons. For instance, my most disappointing part of the entire movie was when he starts off. His first song is my favorite song, Something Comin'. He nailed it. He crushed it. It was like, okay, we'll see. Is he a singer? And they hit it, nailed it. Totally great interpretation of that song. Then a little while later, he does Maria, like the big ballad in the show, and it was just underwhelming. He didn't bring the force or the gravitas that song needs, and it just came off as forgettable and underwhelming. It turned one of the biggest songs in the show to one of the weakest. But other than that, I liked how he performed the character. He turned Tony more into like a more down-to-earth kind of lovable mook than he's traditionally portrayed. He's not quite the level of just sheer charisma that the original cast had, but also very fun to see just a more down-to-earth, grounded character, which is what they kind of tried to do with most of this cast. They tried to make it more grounded, but still keep that magical realism of dancing through New York, which there is a bit of a tonal disconnect from that at the very beginning of the movie. Once you get into the mode of, oh, these are a bunch of gang members, but they're dancing! It's once you get past that, it works pretty well. They did do a good job as the show goes along of designing the choreography to be more balletic, but also still retain the force and the motivation of a bunch of young men who are trying to fight for what they have left. And then can't get away without recognizing bringing back Rita Moreno as the new Doc was great. That was an incredibly smart move. It's the one thing that I feel like truly elevated this one beyond the original, and why I personally like this version more than the original, bringing in the fact that Tony is being supported by this Puerto Rican woman within the narrative of this film, and who has this collection of young men that she supports and loves, but also feels let down by because of their actions. Overall, the new elements that they brought into it, namely, they played a lot more with the idea that their area of New York is being gentrified, also plays into many of the characters' storylines. In I Want to Be in America, they tie that into the American dream being this new shining utopia while juxtaposing that against the squalor and slums of New York in the 1950s. And at the same time, talking about many of the young white men in the area who are feeling displaced and like their world is changing around them, and a bunch of people that are moving in and don't like them for just being themselves and are choosing to take that out on the easiest target rather than looking inward at why they have the feelings that they have. Also, the supporting cast is great. Corey Stoll as Lieutenant Schrank is a wonderfully oppressive force within the film. They play off of him pretty well. He hits a lot of the right notes of somebody who is trying to keep order first, but is also still definitely doesn't care for the Puerto Ricans either. And the most underrated character in it was Brian Darcy James's interpretation of Officer Krupke as a nice, delightful little bit of levity as an officer who just keeps getting stuck in the middle of everything and is just trying to keep it together. Worked really, really well. Some of the other social commentary stuff that they added didn't work as well. It sometimes felt a little bit on the nose when they were talking about the interplay between race and community, especially at the dance. They added in some stuff that was like, okay, that wasn't needed, but fine, whatever. You really want to hammer that racial harmony point home. The other one that felt a little bit weird, given the context of the time period it took place, they made some small changes to the tomboy character within West Side Story. If you've seen the original, there is a young woman who really wants to be part of the Sharks, and is constantly berated by the guys for wanting to be a part of the group. But it's generally understood that she's a tomboy. Like, she's still a girl. She says, "I'm not a girl," in the sense of, what you would normally think of that as in no, I just want to be one of the guys and I want to help. So in this one, they play it more straight, like they're actually trans, and it felt a little forced. Like, it was a good idea, but it just kind of came off as a little bit weird, a little bit of a weird change to make it that much more direct. But, hey, representation, can't be mad about it. And they also have a couple of the best moments in the film. Just totally wrecks a bunch of police officers at one point, pretty great. As I mentioned before, the cinematography is flat out amazing. I'm not sure if they actually filmed it on Technicolor, but it has that deep grain and those particular colors that you get with Technicolor back in the day, that it feels like an older film despite having more modern sentimentality with how they shot it. The set points are great. The fight scene near the end of the movie, the two bookend shots of that scene are two of the most incredible shots that I've ever seen in a movie. One of them you see prominently in the trailer, where it's the shadows moving across the room as the two groups are coming at each other. Incredible. This movie is definitely a shoo-in for best cinematography. There were a couple of choices that were weird, where the locations they chose, it felt like they chose them more for their aesthetic nature and for how they could block around them and stage around them, rather than making sense in the narrative of the film. It felt like the characters, for a show that takes place over a couple of days, they were bouncing all over the neighborhood a lot, which, it's not a huge neighborhood, but it still felt like felt like they were moving across the city pretty quickly. The other big thing is with this one in particular, because of the more earnest nature of the acting, the fact that the narrative pretty much only takes place over the course of, I think it's just 2 days, makes some of the choices of Tony and Maria and their justifications for what they're doing feel really, really weird, even with the fact that they now updated it a little bit to make sure they're saying that these characters are both over 18. Just felt a little bit forced and a little bit weird. But like I said, it's not a replacement for the original. I personally would argue that the changes they made were all good changes that elevate the story just a little bit more than what the original was. The original is a great musical. It's got fun performances. The music is good. The choreography is great. The only problem with it is that, due to the technical limitations at the time, the cinematography is very flat. Some of the performances are a little bit over the top. Both movies have their own tonal inconsistency, but it's a little bit different. The original, it was the tone of dealing with racial harmony, but then you have people who aren't the ethnicities that they're playing, kind of playing caricatures of them. And then the newer one nails that a lot better, but then has a problem where, because they took a more grounded, gritty, realistic approach to the direction, it makes some of the singing and dancing sequences feel a little bit more out of place, but they did what they could with it, and it ended up being really great. In the original, it's that you had a movie that was about trying to encourage racial harmony, and then you have a bunch of characters who are not the ethnicities that they're playing kind of caricatures of those ethnicities. But still, yeah, it's an all-time classic for a reason. The new one is also very, very good. It's got much better cinematography. The performances are all still really, really good, even though which ones are the best ones kind of shifted from movie to movie. Like, you've got a much better Bernardo, but you have a kind of a weaker Tony. You've got a much better, I would argue, you've got a better Maria, but you've got a lot of people are going to hate me for saying that. I think she's the better Maria, but you've got a much weaker Anita. The choreography on both of them is really, really stellar. I like some of the changes they made to it in the new one to give a little bit less of the traditional dancing styles, but also throwing in more, giving these characters more force in what they're doing. I like some of the changes for staging of some of the songs. I like the way they handled Who Knows. I like the way, or Something's Coming. I can't remember what that song's called. It's my favorite song. I like the way they changed Your Officer Krupke. The staging for that scene was great. And I also really liked a lot of the changes they made. The updating, adding narratives for gentrification, Rita Moreno as the Pops character this time around. Even, although it felt a little bit out of place, the trans narrative was good. Or the changes to the tomboy character were good. It's just an incredibly well done revival. I would argue is better than the original. It's not going to replace the original, and I don't feel bad for anyone who comes into it and says they like the original better. They both have great things coming from them, and I think they're both going to stand together as two of the best movie musicals ever made. I highly recommend seeing West Side Story. See it in theaters if you get a chance. This movie is going criminally underwatched, and I think it's because people are so wary of remakes these days, but it really was incredibly well done. Anyway, that being said, I'm James, and I've been arguing semantics.